Okay, so this is week one on the tragedy of the commons, which is a very kind of common topic in political science, used to address a number of different questions. But this is supposed to, generate some kind of discussion for the discussion group and give you some sort of ideas on what kind of posts you can make in the discussion. Speaking of the commons, you can see that's a piles of receipts from my grocery shopping ventures, which is a sort of threat to the commons. So, what is the commons? So, this started with an article back in the 60s or 70s that you'll find in the content folder by Hardin. That was speaking to a very highly educated scientific audience. Published it in Science magazine, one of the top peer-reviewed journals out there, and he was talking about Malthus and the ideas of overpopulation, and was trying to. This was very popular belief back then that we were going to overpopulate the world. And he was talking about how we manage common pool resources. So, what is a common pool resource? It is a thing that everybody uses, like, you know, the ocean, uh, the air, or in his example, a grazing field. Back in 15th, 16th century England, and even still today, they sort of call these the commons. They were, in a feudal system where you have a lord and serfs that work for them. There are certain like common pool resources that all of the workers were allowed to draw from. And so they were allowed to take their cattle or their animals and go graze the commons. And Hardin used it in this really great example of what happens when people are left to pursue their own rational benefit by feeding their own animals and fattening them, keeping them healthy by letting them graze the commons. When people pursue their own rational self-interest to keep their animals healthy and get more animals, inevitably what ends up happening is the commons get destroyed out of people behaving rationally. So as more and more people take their animals to the commons, eventually what happens is all the grass gets destroyed and eaten because people start having more and more animals because they have this common pool resource they can draw from to feed them, and they start bringing them there more often and competing with each other to get in there. And eventually what happens is the commons gets depleted, the grass gets downtrodden and doesn't grow back, and then there's no more resource, and then there's no more animals, and then nobody can pursue their own rational self-interest anymore. And that's the tragedy of the commons, is that by pursuing your own rational self-interest, by looking for the cheapest price for something, by pursuing your own self-interest, which everybody does. Everybody's rational, except maybe 2-year-olds and like deeply schizophrenic people because they can't order their preferences. So there's that, but everybody's rational. Everybody's goal oriented. You are by taking this course or watching this video or something. Everybody's pursuing their own goals, but by pursuing that, what he's arguing in the tragedy of the commons, or showing really, is that people destroy these common pool resources. We're seeing this with the ocean, right? With the big floating states of Texas-sized islands of trash and plastic that are floating out in the ocean. Nobody owns the ocean, right? 75% of the Earth is water and ocean, and nobody really owns it. There's exclusive economic zones, which is like this 200-mile border from the coast that typically whatever country there controls that, and the resources that are underwater. In there, particularly mineral rights like oil and stuff. But nobody nobody really owns. I can't make this too long. Okay, nobody owns the ocean, and so what happens is everybody goes fishing and they just pull resources out. I mean, last time I checked, it was like 10 years ago. I think it was Foreign Policy magazine had this estimate that we were pulling something like the equivalent of 12 Empire State Buildings worth of fish out of the ocean a day, and it just can't keep up with that. But so like I worked in a floating processing plant in Alaska for a while and learned a lot about this and how people come up with different solutions to try and fix common pool resource problems and prevent a tragedy of the commons. And this is like a constant struggle in politics between how you do this. And next week we're going to talk about collective action, which is one of the other core things. Connected to this. But when I was in Alaska, I learned about the fish hatcheries that they build to hatch enough fish to replace, to speed up the population growth, to replace what we're pulling out in the salmon. It's an interesting thing how we catch salmon. Like the hatchery would breed all these baby salmon, and they'd implant certain ones with a chip in their head so you can watch them as they go down to Mexico. And then come back up and try to go upstream to spawn, but then you can actually track the schools. And then what they do, chum salmon in particular, don't swim more than 10 feet deep. Something with their swim bladder or something, they stay within a 10-foot range. So they take these boats out there, they take 2 boats, and then they encircle a school with these 10-foot deep nets around the school. And then they slowly tighten up the bottom until they have them all there. And then they don't even pull them out of the water. They call in for a bigger ship to come in with this giant vacuum that they pull down and just suck up like hundreds of thousands of pounds of salmon into the hull of the ship. And then they'd bring them over to us, where we would process them and take the roe out and send it to Japan, and take the meat and send it to cat food makers. All that salmon, like that Atlantic farmed salmon, none of it's that red color. They add that color later before it gets to the store. That's another story. But common pool resources. So what we're going to discuss, I want you guys to think about this, read the article, and think about some things that are common pool resources. Find some examples. Find something in your own life that you want to write about. Maybe it's a pond, or like you could even maybe consider a highway as a common pool resource, right? And then everybody pursuing their interests by trying to use them, then congests the whole thing and ruins the common pool resource. So we have to come up with ways to try and maintain highways, or build more, or you put tolls on it to limit the and so this has become sort of the biggest question to answer. And a woman, Eleanor Ostrom, won the Nobel Prize not too long ago, or maybe it's like 30 years ago, for writing a book on how to go about doing this in specific field and environments. It's a very fascinating book. But so think about where there are common pool resources, and try to think about what that means politically. I'll put a big list of sort of a few, not big list, but a few questions to sort of spurn you along. But you might want to start out your post by sort of defining what is the tragedy of the commons, or what are the commons, or here are some examples of the commons. And then we'll discuss from there. But your first post, or actually I'll put all these instructions in a different video, and we'll end with this. I got asked a lot about my views on climate change, and when it was more controversial a while back. I'd have in classes where students would argue about it and stuff and everything, and I've sort of taken on this very specific way of talking about the environment, and this connects to the overpopulation, which this pandemic might actually be what I'm talking about. We don't have to worry about the Earth. The Earth has been here long before humans, and it'll be here long after humans. The Earth is going to be fine. What you need to worry about is humans and their behavior and what they're doing on this Earth, because if they anger the Earth enough, it will just kick them off, us off. And with pollution and with climate change or whatever's happening, I use the example of a sandbox. If the Earth in your environment is a sandbox, and we all played in sandboxes when we were kids, and you start using that sandbox as your restroom and your trash can and never clean it up, it's not very fun to play in the sandbox anymore. In fact, the sandbox could kill you if you leave all that trash and feces and other stuff in there and don't clean it up. So that's pretty much what we're doing to the Earth. If the Earth is a sandbox, we're just leaving all our stuff there and not doing enough to clean it up. And if we do that long enough, the Earth is not going to be a livable place, no matter what any politician or commentator or anything else wants to say about it. But so that's it. The commons. We're gonna think about that. There's all sorts of different creative ways to think about this. You can actually think about credible information, like good information, good news, as a common pool resource, because everybody can draw from it. Except ideas and things like that, though, aren't tangible, so they're harder to figure out how one gains a benefit or takes a benefit from it, and how you measure or decide whether or not it if the grass is all gone and nobody can consume it anymore. But read the article in the content page, listen to the questions, and dive in, participate.